to the Identity Security Solution Show, the place for all things SailPoint products and solutions. I'm Alex Leemon, your host, and with me today is Lori Robinson,
Hi.
our VP of Product Management. Welcome, Lori. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thanks, Alex. It's fun to be here.
Yes, we're going to talk about a topic that I love, and I know you have, you're very passionate about this as well. You have been in the industry for quite some time, very close to this, so I'm so looking forward to this conversation.
Awesome. I'm excited too.
So let's dive right in.
Okay.
Many practitioners talk about just-in-time access, least privilege, zero standing privilege, as if they all mean the same thing.
Yes.
So from your perspective, tell us why these things, right? All of these concepts are different.
Yeah.
And why that's important for practitioners to understand.
Yeah, it is really important to understand they are not the same thing, and each of them have a distinct purpose. So I'm so glad you asked this question. It's sort of a pet peeve of mine. So I'm glad you asked. But the reality is, when we look at this, I think zero standing privilege is a desired outcome. That if you go back to the zero trust model, there's really 4 aspects of zero trust that relate to identity, if you will. There's never trust, always verify, least privilege, zero standing privilege, and then continuously monitor and adapt. And those are all distinct aspects that are just like within any security control. They each have a distinct purpose. So if zero standing privilege is a desired outcome, how do you get there?
Right.
And the way you get there is with just-in-time access or time-bound access, if you will. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. But least privilege is slightly different. Least privilege is ensuring that users have exactly the access they need, no more. And that in and of itself is something that stands on its own, different from the just-in-time. So yes, they're all important, they're all part of it, and they're all part of a layered approach to identity and access management and security.
Well, thank you so much for setting the baseline, right?
Got to set the baseline.
Move forward from. So when we're thinking about all of these concepts, and I know that there's concepts, but in practical ways, what should organizations be looking at first? How do they prioritize and wade through all of these concepts?
Yeah. So I think we need to talk about this as authorization. So authorization is something that in identity and access management circles, it's one of the A's, and authentication, authorization, and then administration. Authorization is so important because it applies at 3 different levels. It applies at what we call admin time.
Right.
So when you're setting up an identity, you actually administer policy and say, what should this person have access to? What systems, what entitlements, etc. And then in traditional ways, you end up provisioning that access into the target systems.
Right.
So that's authorization at admin time, policy administration. There's also authorization at runtime. And for a long time, we've been doing that, right? Your IDP or whatever makes an authorization decision at the point of authentication.
Right.
This is really important because when we get to a model of zero standing privilege and trying to reduce risk, what is happening with authorization at runtime really matters today because our threat environment is so complex that we need to make sure that we are doing a tighter evaluation. So I like to say with policy administration, we're answering the question, who can have access to what? But at runtime authorization, we're answering the question, can they have it right now? So how do you assess that, right? You might look at, is their device healthy? Is the network healthy? What location are they coming from? Are they on an approved device? Or in some use cases saying, this is a developer and they're trying to access something. Do they have a ticket associated with that to go and do that? Or a customer service rep trying to access a customer's cloud tenant. Do they have a ticket associated with that? So maybe even a piece of evidence to get in. Sorry.
So context here
Yeah.
is very important.
It's very important. And historically, in traditional approaches, we really haven't had that at runtime. So now we're starting to see this with the shared signaling framework and other, like, we've been working with Signal and here at Navigate have been talking a lot about that, but really kind of that continuous evaluation. So I'll say there's admin time authorization, apply policy, runtime where we're adding more context and answering the question, can they have it right now? And then finally, the last phase, which is in session. And this is where we really get into that zero trust principle of continuously monitoring and adapting. So you can't just assume at some point in time that the user and their environment was healthy.
Right.
You have to continue to evaluate that even after they're in session. And then if you detect a threat or something happens, you have to then react to that.
Be able to respond
contain
to that.
it.
Exactly.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So that's authorization, right? And I think authorization applies to that least privilege side of the house a lot. Zero standing on the other side of it is where, hey, we don't want to leave an account sitting in an application waiting for somebody to elevate to it, particularly your privileged entitlements.
Exactly. So let's dig in a little bit more into zero standing privilege, because it seems like the most significant shift for customers, in the sense that there's obstacles. Like what are the obstacles up until now for them to truly have an environment or an organization that's closer to zero standing privileges?
Yeah. Well, I mean, part of it is just old habits die hard, if I'm being honest. And, we are in a habit of provisioning user accounts into systems. And the reality is most applications require that. They require a user account to exist. And so I think we have to first start with saying, what account should we apply this to? And what system should we apply it to? And maybe you ask that in the other direction. What systems and then what accounts? And this is where this notion of really understanding where we have privilege in our environments come into play, because you have to know which entitlements are privileged entitlements. And then maybe you start to move towards not necessarily JIT-A, just-in-time access, because maybe the app doesn't support it, but at least doing time-bound provisioning.
Exactly.
Where you only make that access available for some shorter period of time versus provision and forget, right?
Exactly.
Right. So that's what we're seeing there. But I will say understanding where those entitlements are is very difficult. Some of the apps not supporting it is another barrier to adoption, at least not the JIT-A use cases. Another thing is operationalizing this. So you have to have policy that says for these entitlements, these are the rules that apply, and a user it's available to them. Because if we end up relying on just access request for this, we'll generate way too much noise.
Right.
If every time someone needs to access a system, they're generating an access request, the approval flows will just be too overwhelming.
Yes,
It'll break. It won't work. And we'll get a lot of pushback. So you've got to have those strong policies in place that are allowing the right users to have that right access. And that's really where least privilege and then just in time and zero standing come together. Yeah. I will say one more challenge, is that I feel like there's some confusion, and maybe even we still have work to do as an industry around audit and access certification. So in this world of just in time, access certification looks different. You're certifying, in this case, policy, and the users associated with that policy, perhaps, versus tell me all the users who currently have this access. And that changes things. Hopefully it makes access certification better. It reduces the volume of line items, that sort of thing. But it also means we've really got to audit those sessions, and we've got to make sure we're logging everything appropriately. So I wouldn't say it's a challenge, but it's a consideration of how do you work with your auditors to ensure that they agree with and are okay with your controls that you put in place, and you're working with them to make sure you're still compliant with that.
No, thank you. Thank you for that. And by the way, you answered actually my next question, which was going to be how do we actually operationalize all of this? So thank you for that.
Yeah, I'm jumping ahead.
No, you know what? Well, I can tell you your passion, show. So that's great. But I do have one more question for you, and it's more related to AI agents, which seems I think I heard that word this week more than I've ever.
Yes.
Because it's the thing. Everybody's talking about AI agents and machine identities and cloud services, and we know that they continue to proliferate at a ridiculous amount.
Yes. Yes.
Or rate. Now, how do you see these models, converging into perhaps a unified framework, if at all? Will we continue to have distinct strategies to tackle each one of those things? Or do you see evolving separate controls?
Yeah. I actually think that I think that the end to end, you're applying the same principles no matter what type of identity.
Right.
It is. So whether it's a machine, whether it's an agent, whether it's a human, whether it's a partner, whatever, the 3 A's I mentioned, you always have to administer them. You always have to authenticate them. You always have to authorize them.
Right.
You also have to govern them, those things.
Right.
So conceptually, you do have to apply those same controls throughout the life cycle of any type of identity. However, they act and behave differently.
Right.
So an agent is not the same thing as a machine.
Correct.
Right. And I think that's an easy thing for people to make that mistake, to think, oh, we're just going to treat them just like any other machine. And they don't entirely behave that way. They inherit access from a human. They inherit access from multiple humans, maybe. And they also can operate on their own.
Right.
And they can generate data and things on their own. So they're not behaving like a machine, which is much more static in nature. However, what they do have in common that is slightly different than humans is they're much more ephemeral.
Yes.
And they're spinning up and down, and they're much more dynamic than human, which makes that process harder. So I don't necessarily think you can apply exactly the same controls, but when you step back and you're architecting your solution, you have to think through that. Okay, how am I going to administer these? How am I going to discover them? How am I going to record them? And then how am I going to make sure they have the right access? How am I going to authenticate? How am I going to authorize?
Right.
How am I going to govern? So I think you've got to apply that. What you do along that path might be slightly different depending on which type of identity.
Right. So I think my takeaway from that is the principles or the controls are not necessarily the same, but we want to apply them with a similar rigor across different identities, but they're nuanced and they have to have, in a way, different approaches. So we just to make sure that we end up to that on that end to end.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example, Alex, just because I think that will help hit it home, is that because they're more ephemeral, the just-in-time model will almost certainly have to be applied. We're not going to provision some permanent access for these. It is much more dynamic and ephemeral. So the just-in-time model is much more relevant in this use case than it is in a human use case. And with these, I mean machines and agents.
Right. Well, a lot to think about for sure.
It's exciting.
It is exciting, but great takeaways for our audience. So thank you so much for being here and sharing a little bit of your wisdom with us.
Thank you. Thanks
Lori.
for having me.
Yes, thank you. And thank you everybody for watching. We are thrilled that you are here. And if you'd like to watch more episodes of the Identity Security Solution Show, please visit cellpoint.com.